As the U.S. changes dramatically its policies, many of our former strengths have become our vulnerabilities. We'll reward those who build, buy, and produce in Canada, and we will build new partnerships abroad. Canada was built by Indigenous peoples before, with due respect, the Americans had even left St. Louis. Whenever we have something over the Americans, we're going to use it. I'm sorry. You know, those whose politics is to destroy, to demolish, dismantle, they're not going to change their instincts. We can't answer them by pining for an old order that's not going to return. It can only be answered by positive action. We need new institutions as much as reimagining the old ones. And that was part of my argument at Davos, that the international rules-based order that we helped build together no longer works as it once claimed, that we cannot restore that which no longer holds, that nostalgia is not a strategy. We have to take the sign down and build anew. We have to do permitting reform, regulatory reform in Canada. It is an essential reason.
But this notion that there is some sort of entry fee, that the Prime Minister says he hasn't heard that term, but certainly a concession that is required to get Canada to the actual table. What do we make of that, Chantal?
Not very much. There was one point where it was said that we should make a concession to get Donald Trump's attention because he's preoccupied with something else. Seriously, a trade negotiation does not involve the president being at the table to do any of this. No, it doesn't bode particularly well. But I agree with the take that the government has offered concessions back in July to try to get things moving, and nothing moved. So the notion that you would go to a negotiating table and play all your cards before you show up at the table sounds like a weird take on poker night.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not good at poker, but I don't think that's what I would do either. One of the things that got the Prime Minister a bit riled up there at the end was he was asked again about U.S. liquor, which continues to be banned in a number of provinces in the country, including Ontario, Manitoba, and Quebec. And that doesn't seem to be something anyone's willing to back down on. I don't know if that's real, Andrew. Like, is that really the thing that's going to move things along?
Well, they're certainly going to use it, hold it in reserve as a bargaining chip. It's clearly got the Americans' attention. It causes them a great deal of loss of revenue. The Prime Minister has also got the advantage of being able to say, well, look, it's not me, it's the provinces. I can't really force them to do anything. So it's that's rhetorical. But look, yeah, the entry fee nonsense is ridiculous, depending on exactly what was said to whom. We only have the basis of this from somebody leaking it to us. Yeah. But I think it's somewhat encouraging that we're talking about specific irritants like supply management, like the Online Streaming Act, and not a generalized, we don't want to have a trade agreement with you anymore, we think this is all bad for America. That at least is some kind of coming down to brass tacks. We're still in the position where the Americans think at the end of this that we'll still have tariffs on Canadian exports. And moving them off of that is going to be very difficult. But this is a little bit more like standard operating procedure, negotiating positions put out in public, rather than sort of existential questions, at least this week.
Is that kind of the part of the issue, though, Althea, is that some of this is being said in public, but presumably, you know, we don't know what the negotiations are like or what the talks are like, and certainly the Prime Minister is not going to negotiate in public.
I think the truth is we don't actually know that there are actual negotiations happening at the moment.
Right.
We know that
apart from fundamental reasons of justice, why we need new partnerships with Indigenous peoples. And we need a willingness, this can be sometimes hard to accept, we need a willingness to use all sources of energy, including some gas, and all technologies beyond conventional renewables, certainly to nuclear, hydro, small modular reactors, carbon capture, and geothermal. We need to build new trade relationships in order to move from reliance to resilience. And it's truth that Canada has long benefited, and we are very grateful. We have long benefited. We did say thank you, long benefited from our proximity to the world's largest and the world's most dynamic economy. But as the U.S. changes dramatically its policies, and that's the right of the United States, as it changes those policies, many of our former strengths have become our vulnerabilities. We still, to be clear, we still have the best trade deal with the United States. Over 85% of our goods move tariff-free across the border. But with American tariffs, so-called 232 or strategic tariffs on autos, steel, aluminum, forest products, I could go on, but in these so-called strategic areas, those are creating deep challenges for our workers and firms in those industries, industries that until now had been highly, highly integrated with the United States to the benefit of America as well as Canada. And our response begins by reimagining aspects of North American integration. And to be absolutely clear, Canada, like Mexico, Canada remains open to deeper integration, including options for Fortress North America in selected sectors. And to be clear, those offers are on the table. But if that route is not ultimately possible, we will invest heavily in new markets and products. We'll reward those who build, buy, and produce in Canada, and we will build new partnerships abroad. We're already applying the main lessons of the past 18 months, that we must build our strategic autonomy. Now, that starts with meeting our NATO obligations. Meeting our NATO obligations, and it has to be said, for the first time since the fall of the Berlin Wall. We are in the process, beyond that, moving forward, of catalyzing $500 billion of investment in defense and security and resilience over the next decade. But it means more than that. Building strategic autonomy means more than defense and security. It means building new, reliable partners abroad, partnerships abroad. Non-US exports are up sharply. We're on track to double them this decade. Foreign investment in Canada is at its highest in 2 decades, and it's running more than twice the rate, adjusted for the size of our economy, of all other G7 economies. We're focused on building sustainably, because reducing emissions is not just a moral duty, it's an economic imperative. So that means those low-carbon homes, low-carbon trade corridors, low-carbon manufacturing, zero-carbon energy. We're building in solidarity with workers. Our focus is on creating good union careers for electricians, welders, carpenters, pipe fitters, the engineers who will build the homes, the ports, the energy systems of this country. And despite the tariff war and actual wars, we've reduced our deficit. We've reduced operating spending, so away from transfers to individuals. We reduced that spending growth, which had been running at 8% a year for 10 years. We've reduced that to 2%. We're including making difficult decisions, reducing 10% of the civil service and 20% of our spending on consultants. We're maintaining the lowest deficit, the lowest net debt to GDP ratio in the G7, while we reinforce our social safety net that includes public health care, public dental care, public pharma care, public child care. Now, the final imperative I wanted to mention is perhaps the most difficult. It's the most difficult given the extreme uncertainty and immediate pressures people are facing. It's this. We have to take risk. Big risk. We have to take risks again. Because in a crisis, fortune favors the bold. And so what we're doing is to motivate that risk-taking, taking risks as government, but also drawing on Canada's history, on examples, and giving people agency. History is the easy bit. Canada was built by Indigenous peoples and voyageurs who mapped this continent and built trading networks from coast to coast to coast before, with due respect, the Americans had even left St. Louis. Whenever we have something over the Americans, we're going to use it. I'm sorry. After the Second World War, Canadians built new neighborhoods for hundreds of thousands of returning veterans, new universities, the St. Lawrence Seaway, the Trans-Canada Highway, Expo 67, inspiring the world. The point is, We used to build in this country, and we're building again, big, fast, bold. $1 trillion of investment is our target over the course of the next 5 years. Let me conclude. And I'll tell you something you know. I probably told you everything I've said, you know. But,
affecting nearly 3 million Canadians. I asked Premier Smith if a separatism referendum can proceed when there could be evidence of illegality within the movement.
Giving a list to a third party is punishable by a year in jail and a $100,000 fine. And so anybody who engaged in that, and the investigation will show if they did, need to be accountable. So I would say that we have to separate the very real grievances that Albertans have from the bad actions of perhaps a few individuals. And so I don't want to interfere with the RCMP investigation, the Elections Alberta investigation, or the privacy investigation. Want those to play out. But we can't ignore the fact that there's at least 1 million or more of my fellow Alberta citizens who are deeply frustrated and have given up on Canada. And that's what I have to work on addressing.
Okay, time now for our party insiders. This week, a bit of a change. We've got Gary Keller here. He's a former chief of staff to Conservative ministers. Greg McEachern is a former Liberal ministerial advisor. And Melanie Richer is a former director of communications for the NDP. We had to put a quota on CNFX grads of 1. That's why Fred isn't here this week. So, Greg, interesting development there from the Premier of Alberta on the pipeline conversation on the MOU. Said she came to Ottawa, very pessimistic, and is now leaving saying that essentially they've got alignment on everything. It's just going to be turned into text. We could see something in days. What do you make of that?
Well, it's very positive. She sounded very positive, and that's a good thing. I have relatives in Alberta. Many of my friends work there. My Canada includes Alberta. For those of us who remember that phrase when during the last Quebec referendum. I do have some problems with some other things there. The very last part of your interview, she really tied the MOU to the separatism, the referendum thing, and I'm very I have discomfort around that because it does sound a bit transactional. She can frame it as, we need to hear that Alberta is important. But the issue here is that she has dalliances with these people. And this is really with the separatists and allowed a lot of things to continue here to try to stave off what happened to Jason Kenney with the base of that party. So she has a lot of responsibility around this. And I kind of got a kick out of it, the fact that she listed like the 3 investigations that are going on. But, she also was quoted this week as criticizing the NDP for not bringing the issue to her. So I don't know, is she going to task the NDP to investigate this? I think she has done some things that have gotten her where she didn't have to be.